I never thought I'd end up in this position. I always believed that family was the one thing that would always have my back, no matter what. It's how I was raised. You know, the whole family first thing. But life doesn't always follow the rules you think it does. It all started 3 years ago, when my life turned upside down in the blink of an eye. I was healthy, working a steady job, and had big plans for my future. But then, out of nowhere, I found myself lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by piles of medical bills I couldn't even begin to pay. The doctors said I needed urgent treatment, and without insurance, I was drowning in debt before I even had a chance to process what was happening. I wasn't completely alone, though. I had family, right? My relatives were doing well for themselves. My uncle had built a successful business. My cousin was always showing off her multiple properties, and my parents, well, they were retired and living their best lives, constantly posting about their vacations and new cars. So I did what anyone would do. I reached out. I wasn't asking for charity or anything like that. I made it clear I just needed a loan. I promised I'd pay it back, with interest if necessary. I thought they'd understand, especially with how well they were doing. I wasn't trying to guilt them into helping me. I just needed a little support until I got back on my feet. But their responses were disappointing. My cousin, Victoria, the one who always boasted about her investments, told me she was too busy and that she couldn't help right now. My uncle, the one who had given me all that advice about standing on my own 2 feet, ignored my calls completely. My parents, well, they did what they always did. They told me they had their own lives to handle and that they couldn't throw money away. It hurt, more than I ever expected. These were the same people who posted their lavish vacations and luxury cars on social media, but when I was fighting for my life, they acted like I was a burden. I spent the next few days in shock. I thought about giving up, but then something clicked. I realized that if I wanted to survive, I'd have to do it on my own. And that's exactly what I did. It wasn't easy, and there were nights when I went to bed hungry, but I pushed through. I worked when I was able to. I fought with the hospital to reduce my bills. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to rebuild my life without them. I'd love to say that the anger faded, but it didn't. It only sharpened. As the months went by, my resentment toward them grew. They had made their decision, and I had made mine. It wasn't an easy road. There were days when I doubted if I'd make it through, but I had no choice but to keep moving forward. My family's rejection hurt, sure, but it also gave me the fire I needed to fight. Every day became a battle to get back on my feet. I couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. I had to work, and work one did. I took on any job I could find. Cleaning, bartending, whatever. My body ached. My mind was exhausted, but I wasn't going to let myself sink into that dark pit of despair. Slowly, the debt started to dwindle. I started learning new skills, things I never thought I'd be good at. I researched remote jobs, freelanced where I could, and most importantly, I kept moving forward with grit. I didn't even know I had. The worst part was the isolation. I saw my parents' vacation photos on Instagram, their happy faces in front of tropical beaches, and I couldn't help but feel the sting. My cousin Victoria was posting pictures of her latest property developments, all while I was scrubbing floors or taking on late-night shifts just to make ends meet. The thought of them, of how little they cared when I was drowning, kept me up at night. But I pushed it all aside. It was hard, but I had learned to live without them. Then came the first message. It was from Victoria, the same cousin who had completely ignored me when I needed her most. The one who had told me, in the most dismissive tone, that times are tough for everyone when I had reached out. She sent me a message that was a little more than 2 lines long. "Hey Emma, it's been forever. Hope you're doing well. Listen, I really need a favor. Can we talk?" I stared at my phone, the words lingering on the screen. I felt a mixture of anger and satisfaction bubble up in my chest. Curiosity got the best of me, though, so I opened the message. At first, I thought it was going to be something small, maybe. She needed some financial advice or help with her latest property purchase. But something in her tone made me think it was something bigger. She seemed nervous, hesitant, unlike her usual confident self. So I did some digging. A quick search on social media showed me what I needed to know. Victoria had stretched herself too thin. She'd made risky investments and bought properties she couldn't afford. And now, with the market taking a dive, she was losing money fast. But there was more, much more. My uncle, Robert, the one who had lectured me about financial responsibility when I begged him for help, had filed for bankruptcy. The business he had spent years building was falling apart. It was almost too good to be true. The very people who had refused to help me when I was struggling were now falling apart at the seams. I wasn't angry anymore. I was amused. They were scrambling, desperate, and they didn't even realize I was watching. I didn't reply to Victoria right away. No, I wanted to see how far they'd go. I wanted to savor this moment. The very next day, my phone rang again. It was my uncle, Robert, the same man who had ignored my desperate calls just a few years ago, now calling me for help. I let it ring a few times before picking it up, my voice as neutral as I could manage. "Hey, Uncle, it's been a while," I said. There was a long pause on the other end. He was clearly struggling to find the right words. Finally, he spoke, sounding tired. "Yeah, it has. Listen, we're in a bit of a tough spot right now, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to help out. I know you've been doing well for yourself, and we could really use some support to get back on our feet." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream at him, remind him of everything he'd said to me when I was on the verge of losing it all. But I stayed calm. "Oh, I'd love to help," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "But you know, I have my own life to deal with now." There was silence on the other end. I could hear him trying to process my words, the weight of his own hypocrisy sinking in. "Besides," I continued, "I wouldn't want to throw money away." His breath hitched, and for a brief moment, I felt a sharp sense of satisfaction. That was the same excuse he'd used when I was desperate, when I needed him more than anything. "Look, Emma," he stammered, trying to recover. "This is different. We're family." "Oh, now we're family," I said, cutting him off. I don't remember feeling like family when I was lying in a hospital bed, wondering if I'd make it through the night. Another long pause. Finally, he muttered, "I see how it is." "Yeah, I guess you do," I said, before hanging up. It felt like a victory, but deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. They were desperate now, and I wasn't done yet. 2 years passed. It wasn't easy, but I kept pushing forward. Every day, every hour, every second was a fight. I worked harder than I ever had before. I taught myself everything I could about business, finance, and investments. I had no other choice. After all the rejection, after the complete abandonment of my family, I wasn't going to let myself stay down. And slowly, things started to change. At first, it was small victories. A little extra cash here and there, freelancing gigs that didn't pay much but helped me build my portfolio. Then, things started to snowball. I took on side hustles, poured everything I had into building a business online, and before I knew it, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The months that followed were filled with sleepless nights, lonely weekends, and sacrifices. There were times I felt like giving up, but then I'd remember everything my family had said to me. I'd remember how they had turned their backs when I needed them most. And that anger, it kept me going. I told myself, I will make it. I'll show them. It wasn't long before I started seeing results. My side projects turned into full-time gigs, and the money started flowing in. I'd go to bed each night feeling the weight of all the hard work, but also the satisfaction of knowing I was doing this on my own. It wasn't easy, but I was proud of how far I'd come. At one point, I got a message from an old friend, Daniel. He'd been the only person who stood by me when everything fell apart. He had never asked for anything in return. He had just been there for me when no one else was. I was grateful for him. He was the one person who truly understood how hard things had been. "Emma, you're doing incredible," he texted one evening. "I've been watching you work. You've come so far, and I know you've got big things ahead of you." I smiled when I read it. I couldn't have done it without him. It felt good to have someone who genuinely supported me. I replied with a simple message. "Thanks, Daniel. You have no idea how much this means to me." But then came the email. It was from my cousin, Michael. My cousin who had once brushed me off with nothing but condescending excuses. The same cousin who had been too busy to help when I was drowning. And now, here he was reaching out to me after all this time. I had to read the email a couple of times before I could process it. It was brief, but the message was loud and clear. "Hey Emma, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I really need some help. Things have been tough. The real estate market crashed, and I'm losing money fast. Can we chat?" I felt a cold rush of satisfaction flood my chest. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. The same man who had been flaunting his success, showing off his luxury cars, his fancy vacations, and his investments was now at the mercy of the market he'd once boasted about. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I did a little research just like I had done with Victoria. A quick search on social media revealed everything I needed to know. Michael's Instagram was full of expensive cars and lavish vacations, but as I scrolled through his posts, I began to see the cracks in his facade. He was no longer posting about new properties or successful deals. Instead, his posts were about cutting back and downsizing. And there it was, a sign that his real estate empire was collapsing. I could almost feel the satisfaction in my bones, but I didn't let it consume me. No, this wasn't just about feeling vindicated. It was about being strong. It was about not needing them anymore. It was about finally seeing them for who they truly were: selfish, opportunistic, and completely unreliable. I let the message sit there, unopened, for a few days. I wanted to savor this moment. I wanted them to come crawling to me, desperate. They had once made me feel worthless, and now the tables had turned. But I knew it wasn't enough yet. I wasn't just going to forgive and forget. I had learned a lot over the past couple of years, and forgiveness wasn't on my agenda. Not yet, anyway. Then, the phone rang. It was a call from my uncle, Robert, the very man who had told me I wasn't worthy of his help, the one who had refused to support me when I was lying in a hospital bed, waiting for treatment that could save my life. I let it ring. For a few moments, I just sat there, staring at the screen. Should I pick up? I wondered. What would I say? The phone kept ringing. I didn't pick up. Eventually, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear his voice, the man who had abandoned me when I needed him most. But of course, he left a message. Hey Emma, it's been a while. I hope you're doing well. I know things were rough for you a while back, but we're in a bit of a situation right now, and I wanted to know if you could help us out. We've had some financial issues, and you've always been good with money. I hate to ask, but we could really use your help right now. I closed my eyes, letting the message sink in. There it was, the desperation in his voice, the awkwardness as he begged for help. It was almost poetic. Yeah, I've been doing well for myself, I muttered under my breath. Too bad you couldn't say the same 2 years ago. I didn't respond, not right away. The next few days passed by, and I continued with my work. My business was growing. The money kept coming in, but then my phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. I could feel my heart beat a little faster as I saw her name flash across the screen. The woman who had told me to stand on my own 2 feet. The one who had ignored me when I needed her most. The one who had let me struggle without a second thought. I didn't pick up. She sent a message shortly after. Emma, it's been so long since we talked. I've been thinking about you a lot. Things have been really hard for us lately, and we're wondering if you might be able to help us out. Your father's health has taken a toll, and we could really use some support. That was it. The guilt trip, the manipulation, the same thing they had always done. They'd never learned. They'd never realized how deeply they had hurt me. But this time, it was different. I wasn't the same person who had begged them for help years ago. I wasn't desperate anymore. I had something they didn't: power. And I was about to make sure they knew it. By the time the messages from my family started flooding in, I had already reached a place where I didn't need them anymore. I was no longer that scared, desperate girl lying in a hospital bed, praying for a hand to pull me out. No, I was stronger now, smarter, more capable than I had ever been before. I had clawed my way to the top on my own, and no one was going to take that away from me. Not even them. The phone calls didn't stop. They kept coming one after another. My mother, Robert, Michael, they were relentless. They didn't get it. They didn't understand that I wasn't the same person who had begged them for help. They thought that just because I was successful now, I would open my heart and my wallet to them. But I was done. I was so far past that, and it was time they learned that lesson the hard way. It started with my mother. Her voice was sweet, almost too sweet, as if she was trying to mask the desperation beneath it. Sweetheart, it's been so long. I've been seeing your posts, and we're so proud of you. You've done amazing things. I could hear the forced cheerfulness in her voice, the way she was trying to act like everything was normal, like she hadn't ignored me for years when I needed them, like I hadn't begged them for help and been turned away. It made my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady. Thanks, Mom. I'm doing well. There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. She was about to ask. I knew it. So, things have been tough here, she finally said, a shift in her tone. Your father's business has taken a hit, and we've been having some financial difficulties. I know you've been doing really well for yourself lately, and I thought maybe you could help us out a little. There it was, the ask. The thing I had known was coming the entire time. The thing I had been preparing myself for. It was as if the last 2 years of sacrifice, of blood, sweat, and tears meant nothing to them. They thought that just because I had finally made something of myself, I owed them something. I stayed calm, almost too calm. I had no intention of helping them, not now, not after everything. You know, I said, my voice low but steady. I've been doing well, but I'm not in a position to help right now. There was silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought she was going to protest, but instead, she sighed, as if she had expected my response. Sweetheart, she continued, her voice cracking slightly, this is really hard for us. We never wanted to put you in this position, but we're family. We helped you when you needed it, and now it's your turn to help us. It took everything in me not to laugh. The irony of it all was overwhelming. You didn't help me when I needed it, Mom, I said, finally letting some of the bitterness show in my voice. When I was in the hospital, struggling to survive, none of you were there. You turned your backs on me, and now you expect me to just come to the rescue? Her response was defensive, but I could hear the crack in her voice. We were busy, Emma. We had our own lives to deal with. Yeah, I snapped, my patience wearing thin, I know. You had your vacations and your fancy new cars to focus on, but I get it now. I understand who you really are. She didn't respond. I could feel the weight of the silence on the other end. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty. I wasn't going to fix their problems. They had made their choices, and now they had to deal with the consequences. Emma, please, my mother said, her voice softening. This is about family. I couldn't hold back anymore. Family? Where was that when I was drowning in medical bills? And you all ignored me. You weren't there for me, so I'm not going to be there for you. There was another long pause, and then she spoke in a near whisper. I don't understand why you're being like this. We're family. Don't you care about us? No, I said firmly. I don't care about you right now. I don't care about what you've done to me. I've spent too long trying to please you, to gain your approval, but I'm done with that. Before she could respond, I hung up, and just like that, the last thread of guilt I'd been holding onto snapped. I had freed myself from them, but that wasn't the end. No, the worst part was still to come. A few days later, I got a message from Michael. I could feel the weight of his words before I even opened the text. It was almost like he had learned nothing. His message was desperate, and that desperation made me feel cold. Emma, I know you're upset with me, and I don't blame you, but I need your help. The market's crashing, and I'm losing everything. Please, I'm at rock bottom. Can we talk? At first, I wanted to ignore him, just like I had with everyone else. But then, something strange happened. I felt a small spark of satisfaction. It wasn't joy, exactly. More like an unsettling sense of justice. These were the people who had left me to suffer. They had thrown me to the wolves, and now they were the ones on the receiving end of that same cold reality. I sat there, staring at my phone, knowing that this was my moment, my opportunity, but I wasn't going to make it easy for him. No, he needed to understand exactly what he had done. I didn't reply to his message right away. I waited. I let him sweat for a little longer. 2 days passed, and then I finally called him. Michael, the first said when he picked up. It's been a while. Yeah, Emma, it has, he said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in his voice. Listen, I know things have been bad between us, but this is different. I really need your help. You've always been good with money, and I don't know who else to turn to. I could feel the satisfaction building in my chest. He was vulnerable now. He was the one who needed something, and for the first time I was in control. You know, I said, letting a slight chuckle slip through. I used to think family helped each other out, but I guess I was wrong. Emma, he said, his voice cracking. I get it. I should have been there for you. But please, I'm begging you. I've lost everything. Yeah, well, I said, dragging out the words for effect. I guess I'm in a position now where I don't really care about what happened. You made your choice when you turned your back on me, and now you're asking for help? There was a long silence, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then, I remembered everything that had happened, everything I had been through because of them. Finally, he said, I see how it is. Yeah, I replied, coldly. You do. I hung up. They had no idea how much I had changed, how much I had grown in these past few years. They thought they could come back into my life and ask for a handout because I was successful now. But they didn't know the real me, the one who had fought tooth and nail to survive without them. I wasn't going to let them back into my life. Not now. Not ever. It had been a few weeks since I had last spoken to anyone in my family. The phone calls had stopped, and I could tell they were starting to get the hint. But the silence didn't feel like a victory, not at first. It felt like a strange emptiness. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to them, trying to win their approval. And now that I had finally found success, it seemed like they weren't part of the picture anymore. And in a way, that hurt. But as time passed, I realized this was the freedom I had fought for. The family I thought I needed wasn't the family I had anymore, and I was okay with that. But they weren't done with me. No, I should have known better than to think they'd just give up. These were the same people who had turned their backs on me when I was at my lowest. They didn't know how to accept rejection. They didn't know how to deal with their own failures. So when they realized they weren't going to get what they wanted from me, they started showing up at my door. I remember it so clearly. I had just wrapped up a long day at work. My business was growing steadily, and I was finally starting to feel like I could take a breath. I had managed to carve out a life for myself, one that didn't include them, and it was starting to feel real. I had bought a new car, upgraded my apartment, and even planned my first solo vacation in years. I was living for myself, finally, and it felt amazing. But that afternoon, as I walked into my apartment, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was just another package, or maybe one of my friends. But then, I saw the security camera notification flash on my phone. I froze. There they were, my mother, my father, and Robert standing at my door. I felt an overwhelming wave of anger rise in my chest, but I didn't let it consume me. I watched them through the camera for a few moments, each of them holding their heads high, trying to act like everything was fine. But I could see the desperation in their eyes. My mother was nervously clutching her purse, and Robert kept glancing down the hallway like he was hoping no one would see them. My uncle, Robert, was holding his phone, likely trying to call me again. They hadn't even bothered to reach out before showing up. I turned the camera off and sat down on my couch, letting the silence stretch for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to open the door, to confront them and let them know just how much they had hurt me, but I knew that wasn't going to do anything. They wouldn't listen. They never had. They knocked again, louder this time. Then the voice of my mother, muffled but clear through the door, "Emma, please. We know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk." I let them wait. I needed to process what was happening. I needed to make sure I wasn't going to lose control. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about taking back the power I had given up for so long. This time, I was in control. This time, I wasn't going to let them manipulate me. I wasn't going to let them use my success for their gain. They knocked again, more frantically now. "Stop being childish, Emma. We're family. Just let us in so we can talk." My father's voice rang out, sharp and demanding. "You owe us this." It stung, but it didn't break me. I wasn't that person anymore. They couldn't manipulate me with guilt trips. Not after everything I'd been through. I had worked too hard to let them take that power back. I stood up from the couch, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. I didn't open it right away, though. Instead, I stood there for a moment, listening to their voices. They were still trying to get in, still trying to make me feel guilty, still trying to make me feel like I owed them something. But I didn't owe them anything. Finally, I opened the door. The look of relief on their faces was almost palpable, but I didn't feel sympathy. I felt nothing. They had used me. They had ignored me when I was at my lowest. And now, they were here, standing at my door like I was supposed to just welcome them back into my life with open arms. "No, Mom, Dad, Robert," I said, my voice calm but firm. "What do you want?" My mother stepped forward, her face softening, almost pleading. "Sweetheart, things have been tough. Your father's investments are failing, and Stop." I held up my hand. "I don't want to hear it. You didn't care when I was dying in that hospital. You didn't care when I needed help the most. And now you expect me to just open the door and give you everything you want?" Robert stepped forward, trying to smooth things over. "Emma, we're family. We've been through a lot together, and we've made mistakes. But this is different. You're doing so well now, and we need your help to get back on our feet." I took a deep breath and stepped back, crossing my arms. I had to stay composed. "You didn't help me when I needed it. I was suffering, and you all turned your backs on me. Now you're here, begging for help because your investments are failing. But that's not my problem anymore. You made your choices, and I made mine." My father scoffed, his face turning red. "You think you're better than us now, don't you? You've got your new car, your fancy apartment, and you're going to leave us to rot, just like we left you?" I looked at him, unimpressed. "I worked for everything I have, and I didn't need you to get here. I don't owe you anything, not a single cent." The silence between us grew thick, and for the first time in years, I felt no guilt. There was no sense of obligation, no yearning for their approval. There was only the cold, hard truth. They had abandoned me when I was at my lowest, and now they had come to me with their hands outstretched. But I was no longer the desperate person they had once ignored. I learned a lot when I was struggling, I said slowly, my voice steady. I learned who would stand by me and who would turn their back, and now I know exactly who you are. You're not my family anymore. You're just people who need something from me, and I'm not going to give it to you. My mother's face twisted into a scowl, but I didn't care. Family, I repeated, almost laughing. You talk about family now, but where was that when I was in the hospital? Where was that when I needed you most? They stood there in stunned silence. They didn't have an answer for me. They knew they had lost. I'm done, I said, my voice quiet but final. I'm done trying to make you proud. I'm done trying to make things work. I've worked hard to build a life without you, and I'm not going to let you destroy it. With that, I closed the door. I stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the reality of the situation sink in. For the first time, I realized that I was free. Free from the guilt, free from their expectations, free from the people who had once been my family, but who had never truly been there for me. And I didn't look back. Story 2. I always knew my family didn't see me as one of their own, but even I didn't expect them to be so blatant about it. My name is Olivia, and I'm 27 years old. I have a good life one I built for myself. I have a stable career, a cozy apartment, and most importantly, a fiancé, Jake, who loves and supports me unconditionally. But when it comes to my family, well, that's a whole different story. To put it simply, I was adopted. My parents, the Crawfords, took me in when I was just a baby, and for the first few years, things were good. They weren't overly affectionate, but they provided for me, and I was grateful. I wasn't naive. I knew life in the foster system would have been much harder, so I counted myself lucky. But things changed when my mom did the impossible. She got pregnant. I was 4 years old when my younger sister, Melanie, was born, and overnight, I became invisible. At first, I was thrilled. A little sister, someone to play with, someone to love. But it didn't take long for me to realize that my parents saw her differently. She wasn't just their child. She was their real child, their biological daughter. And suddenly, my presence in the house became an afterthought. They didn't abandon me completely. They still paid for my school supplies, took me to doctor's appointments, made sure I had food to eat, but there was no warmth, no love. I became more of an obligation than a daughter. And Melanie, well, she followed their lead. As she grew older, she treated me less like a sibling and more like a distant acquaintance. She had no interest in me, and honestly, I stopped trying. By the time I hit my teenage years, I had accepted my place in the family, the outsider, the mistake they made before they got their miracle child. So, at 18, I left. I didn't cut them off completely, but I kept my distance. I visited during the holidays, called every now and then, but that was it. And honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. Jake has been my rock through all of this. He's shown me what love and family should feel like. With him, I don't have to prove my worth. I don't have to beg for affection. I don't have to be afraid of being cast aside. But then, a few weeks ago, something strange happened. My parents started calling a lot. At first, I ignored them, thinking it was just the usual, "We haven't heard from you in a while" guilt trip. But then the messages started coming in. "Hey, Olivia, we'd love for you to be involved in Melanie's wedding planning. It's going to be a beautiful family affair, and we'd really like you there. You should come to visit soon so we can talk about the wedding budget." Wedding budget? I hadn't even known Melanie was engaged. I found out through them, not my sister, not through an invite, but from my parents, who were now suddenly eager to include me. At first I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the moment where they finally see me as family. Maybe this was Melanie's way of reaching out, of mending things. Maybe I had been holding on to old grudges, and it was time to let go. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet up with them. Big mistake. I should have known. I should have known. Sitting across from my parents at the cafe, I could feel something was off. They were too nice, too eager, acting like we were some big happy family catching up instead of the distant, fractured mess we actually were. My mom even reached over and squeezed my hand at one point, something she hadn't done in years. "So," I said, stirring my coffee just to have something to do, "Melanie's getting married." My mom lit up like she had been waiting for me to ask. "Yes, It's going to be a beautiful wedding. She and Ryan have been planning for months. We're so excited. Ryan, so that was his name. I made a mental note of it, despite the fact that my sister never bothered to tell me herself. Dad cleared his throat. We want you involved, Olivia. It's important that family comes together for this. Something about the way he said family made my stomach twist. I wanted to believe they meant me. I really did. So I asked, does Melanie want me involved? My parents hesitated. Of course, my mom said a little too quickly. She's just been so busy. You know how weddings are. Right. Because texting me herself to invite me was apparently too much work. But I ignored the sinking feeling in my chest and tried to push forward. Okay, so what do you need from me? That's when the whole thing unraveled. Well, Dad started, shifting uncomfortably. The wedding expenses have gone a little over budget. There it was. I almost laughed. I had felt it coming, but somehow, hearing it out loud still hit like a slap to the face. How much over budget? I asked, even though I already knew this conversation wasn't going anywhere good. Mom sighed dramatically. About $25,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. $25,000? Weddings are expensive, Liv, Dad said. Like I was the unreasonable one here. I set my mug down with a little too much force. And you're asking me for that kind of money? Why? You guys are the parents. Well, Mom said, in that careful tone she used when she was trying to manipulate me. You're in a comfortable financial position, aren't you? And there it was. The reason they suddenly wanted to play happy family. I felt stupid for ever thinking this was about anything more. For half a second, I had let myself believe that maybe this was a chance to finally be included. But no, they didn't want me there as a sister. They wanted me there as a wallet. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. So let me get this straight. I wasn't important enough to be told about the engagement. I wasn't invited to be part of the planning. Melanie hasn't even spoken to me in months. But now that there's a big bill to pay, suddenly I'm family? Mom pursed her lips. That's not fair, Olivia. Not fair? I let out a short, humorless laugh. You know what's not fair? The fact that I've spent my whole life being treated like I don't belong. The fact that Melanie never once treated me like her sister. And now I'm supposed to just pay for her wedding like we're close? Dad sighed. We're asking you to help. That's what families do. I stared at him. I really looked at him. This was the same man who barely acknowledged my existence once Melanie was born. The same man who sat silently as my mom and sister pushed me further and further out of their lives. And now, he wanted to lecture me about family? I shook my head. No, that's what your family does. I'm not a part of that, remember? Dad's jaw tightened. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic? I repeated, voice sharp. You know what's dramatic? Expecting someone you emotionally abandoned to foot the bill for a wedding they weren't even invited to plan. Mom's eyes flickered with irritation. Olivia, grow up. You're so stuck in the past. This is about Melanie's future. Oh, so now I was the problem? Of course, that was the way it had always been. I was sensitive. I was selfish. I was holding grudges. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. If Melanie wants my money, she can ask me herself. There was a beat of silence, and then my mom looked away, stirring her tea, and I knew. She doesn't even know you're asking me for money, does she? Neither of them answered. I nodded, standing up. Right. Well, good luck figuring it out, because you're not getting a dime from me. Mom's head snapped up. You're really going to be this selfish? I smiled. No, I'm just finally putting myself first. Then I grabbed my bag, walked out of the cafe, and left them sitting there. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but of course it wasn't. I should have known. They wouldn't take no for an answer. After I walked out of that cafe, I fully expected some guilt-tripping texts, or maybe a half-hearted attempt to get me to reconsider. What I didn't expect? For my parents to go completely radio silent for a few weeks. And honestly, it was nice. No calls, no messages, no sudden family is everything speeches. Jake and I went about our lives, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Then, one evening, as I was curled up on the couch with Jake, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Melanie. Melanie, hey, just wondering if you're still coming to the wedding? I sat up so fast that Jake gave me a weird look. What's wrong? He asked, setting down his drink. I turned my phone so he could see the message. Apparently, I was invited to the wedding. He frowned. Wait, didn't your parents? Exactly. Something wasn't adding up. I debated how to respond. A petty part of me wanted to reply with something snarky, but I decided to play it cool. Me wasn't aware I was invited. It took her less than a minute to reply. Melanie, Mom and Dad said you didn't want to come. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of rage and exhaustion settle over me. Of course they lied. Of course they made it seem like I was the problem. And Melanie? She just believed them. No questions asked. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my hands from shaking as I typed. Me, that's not what happened. I told them I wasn't going to help pay for your wedding. Then they stopped talking to me. There was a long pause. Then, Melanie, wait, what? I sighed, rubbing my temple. Me? Mel? They asked me to help cover your wedding costs. $25K to be exact. Another long pause. Melanie, you're joking. Me, wish I was. Then, for the first time in years, my sister actually called me. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Please tell me you're messing with me, she said, her voice unusually sharp. I leaned back against the couch, watching Jake as he silently waited for my reaction. Nope, they made it sound like you knew and were fine with it. She swore under her breath. I never asked them to do that. I had no idea. I just assumed you didn't want to come. I closed my eyes. Well, now you know. There was a beat of silence before she exhaled. Liv, I'm so sorry. I almost dropped my phone. In all my years of knowing Melanie, I had never heard her apologize to me for anything. Look, she continued, her voice softer now. I know I haven't been a great sister. I didn't even think you'd want to come, so I didn't reach out, but I swear, I never asked them for money, and I definitely didn't tell them to guilt trip you. I wasn't sure how to feel. I had spent years being angry at her, convinced she didn't care about me at all, and maybe for a long time she really didn't. But now I could hear it in her voice. She was pissed. Not at me. At them. I believe you, I said, my voice steady. But I still don't know if I want to come. Another silence. Then, quietly, I get it. And that was that. But it wasn't over, because the next morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls from my parents, and when I listened to the voicemail my mom left, I nearly threw my phone across the room. Olivia, she started, her voice thick with fake concern. I can't believe you would tell Melanie something so hurtful. Do you even realize what you've done? She's upset. She was having such a wonderful time planning her wedding, and now you've ruined everything. I hope you're happy. You should be ashamed. I stared at my phone, barely able to process what I was hearing. They were mad at me? Me? Jake, who had been watching from the kitchen, raised an eyebrow. I take it that wasn't a heartfelt apology? I let out a bitter laugh. Oh no. Apparently, I ruined the wedding by telling the bride what was happening behind her back. Jake scoffed. Of course. Classic. I flopped onto the couch, my brain running a mile a minute. I had spent so many years letting my parents dictate how I felt about myself, letting them make me feel less than, letting them push me aside like I didn't matter. But this was the final straw. I was done. I stared at my phone, my mom's voicemail still playing in my head. You should be ashamed. Ashamed? Ashamed? Ashamed. I had spent my entire life walking on eggshells around these people, trying not to upset them, trying not to be a burden. And now, because I refused to be used, I was the villain in their little story. I took a deep breath and turned to Jake. I think I'm finally done. He gave me a small smile, like he had been waiting for me to get to this point. Yeah? I nodded. Yeah. And for the first time in years, I felt light. But of course, my parents weren't finished yet. Over the next few days, I got text after text, call after call. My mom flipped between you ruined everything and just be the bigger person. My dad took a more practical approach, trying to convince me that family helps family convenient, considering they never treated me like family until they needed money. Melanie, on the other hand, was quiet. Then, the night before the wedding, she called me again. I answered, keeping my voice even. Hey, she sighed. I wanted to call before tomorrow. I don't know if you're coming, but if you do, I just want you to know that I'd really like to have you there. I hesitated. Even after everything? Yes, she paused. And I talked to Mom and Dad. I told them they were out of line. I blinked. You did? They don't get it, Liv. I don't think they ever will. But I don't want to be like them. And if I ever made you feel like you didn't belong, I'm sorry. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I appreciate that, I said, my voice softer than I expected. She let out a breath. So, are you coming? I glanced at Jake, who was watching me carefully, letting me make the decision on my own. And I realized something. I wanted to believe this moment could fix things. I wanted to believe that showing up tomorrow would magically heal all the wounds that had been there for years. But it wouldn't. It was too late. I don't think I can, I admitted. Not this time. Melanie was quiet for a long moment. Then she exhaled. I get it. And for the first time, I believed her. The next day, Jake and I spent the afternoon at home, eating takeout and watching dumb movies. My phone buzzed a few times, but I ignored it. And later that night, I got one last text from Melanie. Melanie, I wish things had been different, but I respect your decision. And I really do love you, Liv. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some dramatic, tearful reunion where all was forgiven. But it was enough. And for the first time in my life, I was enough.